Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of FaB, and I tell you, this is my pleasure today, a real pleasure, because I've asked him back, and he so graciously came back to
Mhm.
do a show. We haven't been here in a while, and I'm talking about Matthew Street. Welcome back to FaB, Matthew.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. It's a pleasure to be back with you and hanging out and talking some music and Beatles stuff.
Yeah, this is great. Yes, some of you know when I first started this over, geez, I don't know, well over a year or so or more ago.
Oh, at
Uh,
least, yeah.
yeah, Matt and I used to do all. We still, they're there for you to see all the countdowns, rankings. I'm all right. The
Hmm.
rankings countdown from, I guess, yeah, what you say your least favorite to most favorite tracks we used to do, and there's a lot of videos of that for Beatles albums. We did all the Beatles albums, so you can check that out. So Matt has, of course, his channel Matthew Street, where he does Beatles stuff, power pop stuff, and a lot of fun. Once in a while, he has those characters that I enjoy, which I haven't seen in a while,
Yeah, it hasn't been too many characters lately.
but
I,
I
I've
do
I've been
enjoy.
the character lately, just me acting
Yeah,
like an idiot.
and there's fun stuff on there. Like don't forget the George Harrison box, the Uber box. Well,
Oh
what would
yeah,
and all things must gas and all that kind
yeah.
of stuff. There's a lot of funny stuff over there too, and informative, and a lot
I,
of
I I take you as my highest influence for your silliness on your channel.
oh
You keep
well.
the humor going too.
I try to do that. And you just hit a milestone, right, on your channel.
Oh yeah, yeah. I just hit 4,000 subscribers. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm grateful for your support over the years.
Oh, congratulations on that. Well, Matt and I were just trying to think of a topic to talk about here, and wanted to do a John Lennon show. And then we thought, hey, there's something we're both kind of thinking about lately, which I call anyway the marginalizing of John Lennon. This to me, it can be a controversial thing. It's probably going to be a controversial show. I don't want it to be John versus Paul kind
No.
of thing. There'll be inevitable comparisons and things in here, but I'm going to try to be fair about it, right? And Matt, why don't you start us off with where we begin with our analysis here of the situation where John slowly became marginalized, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say you're absolutely correct, and especially in recent times. I mean, and I'd like to get your take on some of my thoughts here. Is that with John, he's had this legacy that goes way back to when his public life started in the Beatles, way back in the early '60s, and his legacy, to me, anyway, personally, I've always looked at John's legacy as a roller coaster. He's had the ups and he's had the downs. Just real quick, there's the old stories you read about of the young pre-Beatles, young, angry, rage-ridden John Lennon, who had a tough, difficult upbringing and was raised by his auntie because his dad took off and his mom couldn't handle raising him. You get all those old stories and where he was at then, and then how the music and art became his passion, became something he could release those feelings into. And so you have that era of John, his legacy of and how his spirit and his character came to life through the music and through expressing it. Certainly, when the Beatles became famous, and he became like this leader figure almost way back in the early Beatles career, that early part of their career. He was the Beatles leader. He was the chief Beatle. That's the way he was known. I mean, I was only a little kid then when as that era happened with the Beatles fame, but John was the leader. He was looked at as the boss, the Beatle boss. And then I'd like to get your take how that changed as the '60s went on and the Beatles' career came into the post Brian Epstein period after Brian died, and how John his leadership role changed so much in the latter part of the Beatles' career. Then he
Mm.
comes into the '70s, the first part of the solo years, and he's this peacenik. He's a man with a message. He's becoming this man who wants love and peace throughout the world and treat women right and all this stuff. And but then he became like towards the mid '70s this kind of drunken partier. He got known as the drunken party John Lennon. So the roller coaster, there's high John, low John, and it ends up that I feel he was on a real high right before his death, that he was at this point in his life where he had found some solace, some peace at trying to be a good husband, being a good father, getting back into music and expressing his art again to the world. And that was obviously, as we know, taken very abruptly from him. But then he got elevated almost to a saint-like status post his passing, where he was on that high of the roller coaster again, St. John. But then over the years, since the 80s and coming into the 90s and now up to today, I feel he's become this kind of forgotten figure. Not with the Beatle fanatics like you, like me, like other people we're friends with here. We always love John and his music, and that will never change. But with the general population, as the fans of John age and younger generations come up the pike, they seem to have forgotten the magic of John, I think. And I think he's been kind of put on this back burner, to use a cliche. He's on the back burner now with a lot of people that are in their younger 40s, 30s, 20s, and younger. They've kind of forgotten the magic of John, and I feel that's a travesty. What are your thoughts on that? Do you?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Everything, as far as starting the young John with the angst and the
Hmm.
angry man, a young man, and doing things that he always owned up to. John always talked openly about his flaws. He just talked about them in interviews, and he wrote about them in songs. So there was no real mystery to this. When a lot of times when people would write books, tell-all books about John and stuff, we already knew by his own admission that he wasn't the greatest father to his first son Julian, and he had a lot of growing up to do. And I think, as you said, he was getting to that point tragically near the end of his life. I think he was really the happiest he'd ever been, which he said he was. And he actually was becoming a good father, learned how to, through his mistakes. Unfortunately, poor Julian wound up being the one
Hmm.
that lost a dad, but he tried to make it up as best he could as he matured with Julian and they were seeing each other. And of course, through those mistakes, he wound up being a better dad to Sean. And but yeah, as we know, John had those periods where he was the dominant person. They used to say there was no leader in the Beatles, really, but oh no, come on, you're the leader, kind of
Hmm.
thing. He was the leader pretty much up until, like you said, around mid 60s, Brian Epstein's death or so. I think that Brian Epstein's death and John really getting into acid a lot and doing a lot of drugs, and then later meeting Yoko and becoming infatuated with her, kind of made him be more passive and less interested in what the Beatles were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And to a point, I understand that. Not the drug part. I never, but it's not my thing. Drugs, never has been. But I could understand you finding that somebody that actually you've been looking for your whole life, who was kind of like a mother figure too. Let's face it, he called her mother,
Hmm.
Yoko, and he needed a strong woman. Paul has even said that John always had strong women in his life, and he liked a strong woman. People used to say, and still say, Yoko controlled John, and he vehemently denied that. And you can hear it in the Heart Play interview album, Playboy of 1980. He, in no uncertain terms, pretty much tells you, F you, brother or sister, you don't know what's happening with
Hmm.
that. But then I say, if he was kind of controlled, which is a tough word, some men like them to
Influ-
take the initiative.
influenced.
She
You know.
influenced him,
Mm.
and that there's nothing wrong with that. They influenced one another. I think they had an equal partnership, from what I can tell. If it is any truth, though, that she kind of like took the lead in some things, like the business and things like that. John liked that. I always thought it doesn't really matter if a man is being kind of, uh, I don't know what the word is, like led a bit. if indeed that's what
or
it is.
more
What's the word I'm
passive,
looking
more
for?
passive in certain
Yeah,
situations.
more passive in
Passiveness,
certain.
yeah, yeah.
Take the passive side more and let the other person. If that's what you like, if that's what you want, it's to me, it's not a bad thing.
And
But
most relationships are like that.
yeah, they are.
Most healthy relationships are in that manner.
Yeah, but I think Matt, when it gets to be a Beatle, it's John. Oh no, fans look at that and they're like, no, we want our Beatle John. We don't
Mm,
want him being with Yoko or being like playing second fiddle to anybody or whatever.
right.
But yeah, let's go for the purposes of, I guess, the main purpose of our discussion, talking about how after John died, after he was killed, he took on first this, as you said, saintly hue to him. He was a
Yeah.
martyr, poor John.
Mhm.
Well, look, I don't think anybody want to trade places with somebody that what happened to John
No,
in
no.
order to gain any kind of mystique or special
Hmm.
halo,
You're right.
right? And wouldn't John be the first person to say, "I'm no saint," you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And
And I just going to say, I want to go back to something else you said that's really important. How you said he was trying to, right at that point, just before his passing, he was trying to be a better father to Julian and try to make amends for their past and how he had neglected him for so many years. But the damn shame is, like you were saying, he got cut off right at eight. He was so, think about age 40. He was only just turned 40 years old. He was still so young. And in those 40 years, he had lived so much of a life. And yet here he was at age 40, having that recognition you mentioned about being aware of who he was and his frailties and his faults, and trying to make amends with the people in his life that he had perhaps neglected, like Julian, but it got cut off so suddenly. He didn't have the. Can you imagine John being 82 years old now and having the last 40 years to build more of a relationship with Julian, be a better husband to Yoko, be a father to continue that father and son relationship with Sean, maybe become a better friend and rekindle things with George before he passed, Paul and Ringo and other people in his life. He never had that chance.
nope,
that
never had the
that was
chance.
so unfair to now look back on him and judge him and put him in this corner of, well, he, and look at his negative aspects without looking at where he was trying to go and where he might have been eventually if he had had the chance. He'd never had that chance. So I just think it's unfair to totally judge him now based on his youthful years, his 20s, his 30s. Think about it, 20s and 30s. To
You're a
me, you're
kid,
still just a kid. And he
absolutely.
made mistakes. He made a lot of horrible mistakes. He admitted
Yes,
it. And
yes,
you pointed that out. He admitted it, that was full of mistakes. But
yes.
here I am, age 40. I'm trying now to look to, at the time, I remember saying, the 70s are over. They were a drag, the 60s. Now here we are. We're facing the 80s. We're going to go into it full speed, positivity. I mean, the future looks so bright for him for where he would have psychologically gone, as a person, as a human being. I think he was heading in the right direction. He
Oh,
just didn't get that chance.
yeah,
You know,
you nailed it. Without a doubt, I agree with every word that you said. I want to say also, Julian, as John said in the Playboy interview, and probably not very nicely the way he said it, was born out of a whiskey bottle. That wasn't really a nice way of putting it,
right,
but he's trying to say. And then he said, like me. He said he admitted, like me, like because John had the same kind of thing. I think, but he was saying also that uh, as a youth, he really, I guess, was owning up to the fact that he really wasn't really grown up yet. And I have to tell you, when you really think about it, Julian was born when John was just a kid for all intents and
oh yeah,
purposes. A lot of maturing to do. He was born, before uh, Cynthia had gotten pregnant before they were married, and he married her. He give him that. I mean, he married Cynthia,
right.
for that. uh, and kind of owned up to his responsibility. But then all of a sudden, Julian is born, and then the Beatles take off, and none of us can imagine
Can
that
even
kind
relate
of.
to that. Yeah,
Can you imagine though that kind of like acclaim and the pressure on them and all they have to do. Right? Yeah, John has to write music all the time, make movies, make records, and new singles, and
Uh,
globetrotting all
yeah,
around the world.
you're
Right?
treated like a deity, like you're a god. The Beatles were like gods to people. People were. It's just how do you at age 22? You're just a kid, and you have a child.
22. Right? He wasn't even
And
23 yet
having
when Julian
children
was born.
myself, I was in my mid-20s when I had my first child, and you're holding this baby, and you just feel so overwhelmed, like, oh my goodness, I'm responsible to mold this little life into something, to make them into a decent human. And I wasn't a Beatle. I was just doing it as a
Exactly.
regular Joe. Here he is with this baby and a new wife, and now all of a sudden in 1963 they exploded in the UK, then later the world. How do you handle that at that such tender age? I mean, that's almost impossible to do it
Yeah, and
right.
then you come home, for the little time you have off, and like as John would say, Julian was a different size. He didn't even
Right.
recognize the way he
Right.
looked half
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and you have and you're probably already like kind of beat and tired and run down, and you have to try to like maintain some kind of parenthood for
Yeah.
this poor child. How
I
are you
can't
going to
even
do that?
imagine. Yeah.
So the best you could do, I think, is make it up to him as you get older in your
Mm.
30s and 40. He tried to see more of Julian, but that's the Julian aspect of it. After John's murder and he
Yeah.
became the Saint John, it really wasn't fair to Paul McCartney,
No.
because Paul, I remember, and I'm sure you do too, after John's death, it was like John Lennon was the Beatles. It
Yeah.
was all
Yeah.
about John is the main Beatle, and he's the great guy, and isn't he the a saint and all of this?
Yeah.
And Paul had a term that he called him out of frustration, Martin Luther Lennon.
Oh yeah. I remember. Yeah, I remember that
Right?
term. Yeah.
He's not wrong, Paul. I mean, I want to say, people think a lot of times, oh, you don't like Paul, Joe. That that's
No,
not
but
true.
Paul
You
was
know,
correct though. I mean,
he was
John,
correct.
when John
Correct.
died in December of '80, as you said, through a better part of the '80s, John was elevated to this saint-like status by the fans, by the people that loved the Beatles and John, because I'm at the time I was 18 or just turned 19 when John was killed, and I had been a Beatle fan since I was a little kid like you. I mean, so yeah, naturally it was like, oh my goodness, I don't even want to try to express to you the devastation I felt, as I'm sure you felt
Sure.
in December 1980 as a fan of the Beatles and of John. I can't even express to you how it affected my life in a real kind of sad and negative fashion. It was one of the
Same
most
here.
devastating things that happened to us as fans.
Mhm.
So naturally, we were that generation. We were those young, teens and 20 somethings and maybe 30 somethings that idolized the Beatles and John. So we were all guilty of it. We elevated him to that status. He was taken so abruptly from us in such a horrible fashion. So naturally, it was going to seem like a slight to Paul and even to George and Ringo to a lesser extent, but a slight to them that we've elevated John, who was taken in such a cruel manner from us, to this high status. And so the other three Beatles were kind of regulated to sidemen, like, oh,
Right. Right.
Beatles were all John, Paul, and the rest of them, they're over there. And I understand why Paul was maybe hurt or upset by that. He
Absolutely.
had every right to be, because his importance to the Beatles and what they created and their gifts to the world were just as important as John.
Mhm. And had it been Paul that had been murdered, God forbid, and all that, and it switched, it would be the other way around. I feel the same way. It would be Paul that had been elevated to
Right.
saintly
Right.
status. Somebody's murdered like that, they become like a victim. They are a victim,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and,
Yeah.
and they become a martyr in a way. It's a
Hmm.
natural thing. You tend to feel sorry, and this went on through the '80s, and Paul really had to work hard to
Yeah.
not be in John's shadow, and
Yeah.
that wasn't
Yeah.
fair to him at all.
And he
Uh,
he didn't ask for it. It was thrown at him. He was made to feel sometimes like he was in John's shadow. And
right,
and yet, here he is trying to balance the devastation of losing his friend, losing John in such a horrible fashion, and yet okay, I've lost my friend, so I've got that's eating at me, and now I've got the general public making me look like I was just some side character who, didn't have as much of an impact as John Lennon did. That
Yeah.
totally fair to Paul to have to try to put him in that position to balance those two things.
I had a friend at the time that was a Paul McCartney guy, so to speak. Paul was his favorite, and then John was killed, and he started to gravitate towards John.
Mm.
And I remember we would talk about the Beatles or something. And then he'd go to me. He used to call John Lennon a loser when he was a Paul guy. He used to joke around and say, "John's a
Yeah.
loser." He even said it himself, "I'm a loser." But then when he became, teasing, playing around like guys do, then when he became a Paul guy, I never forget the defiantly looking at me and saying, "Joe, John Lennon was the Beatles."
No.
And I'm like, no way, man. That's a stupid. It's four individuals, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
talk about four individuals, and certainly when it comes to Lennon and McCartney, it's Lennon and McCartney are equals,
Hmm.
Uh, uh,
Yeah.
so there was that, but now it's a different time,
Oh
and
yeah.
I've seen the pendulum swing the same way towards Paul, which is unfair. And let's get into that a little bit if we
Yeah.
can.
Well, look what's happened. I mean, you were 18, I was 19, and now we're becoming old men. So that generation who elevated John to that status because we were the young fans back then, the teens, the 20 somethings. The 20 somethings are now all in their 70s. Us teenagers back when John passed, we're all in our in our 60s. I mean, so we're all aging out. And what's come in behind us? You have these people that are in their 40s, 30s, 20s, and younger, even, that are Beatles fans, and look at and have become Beatles fans in the decades and years since John's passing. They're looking at it from a different perspective. John's been gone for well over 40 years now, and they're
Right.
they're they're looking at the whole history of the Beatles from a totally different lens, and they're seeing, oh, John Lennon, yeah, he was the Beatles, yeah, Come Together and Abbey Road, yeah, that was he had a little solo career, he had 6 or so solo albums, but then he was taken so tragically, but Paul McCartney, and wow, yeah, Paul's got 20 something albums, and he's been on a million different tours around the world, and Paul's so visible, and he's out there, and I'm a Paul fan now. I'm all, Paul's the Beatles, he's the Paul has been here. God bless him and Ringo. They're still with us into their 80s. But yeah, you're right. The pendulum has swung now, and I'm even feeling it a little bit for George too. That George is kind of being forgotten. When I say forgotten, I hate to use that term, Joe, but even George is kind of put on the back burner a little bit. John is definitely now not Martin Luther Lennon anymore. He's not.
No, he's
He,
Satan incarnate
yeah,
to a
it's
lot of
like
people. He's the devil himself.
a lot of
It's
this
disgusting.
upcoming generation of fans of the Beatles are now like, John, and they're looking at all the negativity and negative aspects of John, and they're forgetting the positiveness of John and the good of John and where he was going on that fateful night in December of 1980, where he was heading. He was heading in such a great and positive direction, and he was so young when he was cut down. He didn't have the chance to fulfill it and live it out. And I think fans much younger than us are forgetting that. And you're right. He's
Yeah, I've actually seen George. George sometimes gets from my experience. Yours might be different. Actually, gets a lot of more acclaim these days to me, to what I see, than
Mhm.
John. Even it seems people like either new people like either Paul or George. A lot. I'm finding. Um, I think that what happened, how I see it, is that Paul, thank God, okay, Paul being Paul, kept on doing what he does best, and he went back to touring in 1989
Mm.
when I first got a chance to see him, and in 1990, the 89-90 tours, and then ever since he's been pretty steadily out there. And I say thank God. I wouldn't want it any other way. Paul was always the workaholic, I
Hmm.
think as Ringo referred to him as, he always was out there. He didn't stop writing. He didn't stop recording albums. I'm grateful for that because Paul has always been like that, and I'm glad he never stopped and continues to go on and giving so many young people, generations coming up, a chance to see him. And in a way, to his credit, as we say, carrying the torch for the Beatles legacy because he does so
Right.
much Beatles. You can
Hmm.
still see This is as close as you're going to get to seeing the Beatles when you see Paul doing a Beatles show. A lot of it's Beatles,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
I love that. And I'm not taking anything away from him, but I think that by doing that, he also reestablished himself and his reputation as important in the Beatles, and not only that, but in some ways now, chief number one Beatle, and that, in the eyes of a lot of people,
Yeah, he's become the chief Beatle.
he is not. And again, I know that I'm going to mention. I don't think he'll mind. I think I've heard them say it. My friend Tom Hunyadi,
Okay.
who does a show called Two
Yeah,
Legs
with
podcast,
Andy. Yeah.
along with his friend Andy Nichols. I'm sure
Mhm.
they don't mind me saying. They've said, and they're right. They say, look, it wasn't Paul's fault John was murdered. He's not supposed to go on and continue.
No,
No, of course, of course.
absolutely.
You're 100% right. However, it wasn't John's fault he was murdered either and gets forgotten.
Mm.
I say forgotten. I'm sorry. That's the word I use because I sometimes feel that way. And maybe I slip out with that.
Yeah.
But you said Paul's had 40 plus years now to continue, and I'm grateful for that. I don't. That's why I keep saying that. Thank God. I don't want anybody. I wouldn't want Paul to just rest on his laurels and not do anything the last
Hmm.
30, 40 years. I
Right.
want him to continue. But a result of that is there's no frame of reference for young people coming up to see John
No.
and to. Can you imagine seeing John on Saturday Night Live, seeing him interviewed by Howard Stern, and
Oh
Stern
my
and Lennon
goodness.
going trading jabs
And
and
tours through
thoughts,
the years, being able to
tours.
see John live, and how many more albums he would have put out since 1980.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
yeah.
he would
I
have had several more. Uh, yeah,
can't
his
even I
catalog
can't
is
even
so
imagine.
so light. You have to really be a dedicated fan nowadays if you're a younger person to go back and really hone in on the history, and especially, well, not so much the Beatles, but John's solo career, John Lennon. You have to really go back and you have to really spend time with it and really want to go back and study his music and listen to what little solo material we have from John and appreciate who he was and the impact he had. Um, and I get it. You're absolutely right. For the most part, new upcoming fans who were not around in 1980, they're going to gravitate more towards what Paul is doing now because Paul's more accessible. He's, like you said, God bless him. Thank goodness he's still here with us.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Thank goodness Ringo is still here with us. Ringo's
yeah.
still putting out albums and touring, and so we're very fortunate as Beatle fans, and certainly the younger fans coming up, that people as young as my children's ages and even my grandchildren's ages can now be exposed to a segment of the Beatles because Paul and Ringo are still out there and still very highly visible. But John is not, unfortunately, and George too, the last 20 something years. But John, certainly, we're coming up on, 43 years, 42, coming up on 43 years since he's been gone this year.
Mhm.
That's a long time. That is,
Yes.
he's been gone longer than he was on this earth. And
Right.
and when you think of that, it's just, unfortunately, I don't want to say it's a natural thing that should happen, but I just think as more and more time goes by and people like you and I age out, let's be honest. I mean, let's pray you and I have longevity and we're here well into our 80s, but within the next 20, 25 years or so, people like us, we're going to be at the end of the road. We're going to be,
Mhm.
and so who's coming up to keep that flame alive for John, to keep the memory of the Beatles and their solo music alive? Hopefully, there are going to be younger fans coming up that will remember the importance of John and will realize that yes, Paul is important, and he's certainly has now had his time to express who he is over the past 40 years. But don't forget the past. Don't forget who
Right.
helped laid that foundation. It wasn't just Paul or even Ringo. It was George. It was John. John certainly had a big part of that foundation.
Let's put the Lennon back into Lennon and McCartney. I know
Right.
that's
Yeah,
extreme. A lot of
I
people
know.
say, "What are you talking about?" I feel that way sometimes.
Well, yeah, people of our generation absolutely feel that way. Like, yeah, put the Lennon back in the Lennon and McCartney. But if you say that to someone in their 20s or 30s, they look at you like you got two heads. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, they,
Well,
they don't have the same experiences we do, and that's understandable. We've been around a lot longer, but it's sad for someone like in our age category who were those young preteens and teens in the 70s to see what's happened over the decades. It is kind of sad, that unfortunately it's almost like, well, it's a fact of life. Time marches on, and when somebody's not here to maintain their legacy and or have somebody who, I mean, I know Yoko, Sean, and Julian to some extent have tried to keep John's legacy alive and to keep him in what his importance in the public eye. But unfortunately, they do the best they can. But you need the backing. You need the fans out there to understand and realize John's place in history, musical history, certainly.
and with John's solo material, I don't like using this term for a lot of things, movies or music, but sadly, I gotta concede that John's solo music, a lot of it is dated, and that's a word I don't like using.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, I hear it's not uncommon of people now. Things change, there's different waves, things ebb and flow, things change. Right now, at this particular point in time, a lot of people aren't too crazy about John's overall catalog, solo catalog.
Yeah.
And I always hear them on my channel because having channels you interact with a lot of fans, right? And it seems to me they all say he doesn't have a very strong solo catalog, and they admit that oh yeah, Plastic Ono Band is a masterpiece, and Imagine is another pretty solid, maybe a masterpiece. But after that, they say, it's very sketchy his solo career. And the unfortunate thing to me is all the causes that John took, and that was interesting at the time. The '70s are a long time ago.
Yeah.
Singing "Power to the People" and singing "Give Peace a Chance" or whatever it was, or the "Sometime in New York City" album, when all of
Attica,
those
yeah, Attica
causes.
State. People, a young
You
fan
know,
today is going, "What the heck's Attica State? What you talking?"
this is old stuff, old,
Yeah,
old, old. He's not singing about current events or politics of the last 40 years or whatever
right, right.
he would be interested in. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
And yeah, I think his stuff is unfortunately dated. Um,
yeah. And,
what?
and well, like you're saying, and he
What?
didn't have the chance. Like every career musical, in my opinion, anyway, every musical career ebbs and flows. And John came out of the box strong, like you said, with Plastic Ono Band and Imagine. I happen to love Mind Games myself, and I
I
know
like it.
you love Walls and Bridges too, like I do.
Yes.
But I get it. I can see where a more critical looking fan might look at it and say, yeah, he came out of the box strong, but then he kind of faded a little bit, got a little dated in what he was releasing with, sometime in New York City. And this one's a little overproduced. And then he takes 5 years off. And then when he comes back, he's sharing time with Yoko on the album. And so they're looking at his career as in that little snapshot. And they're saying, oh, it's not the greatest solo career. I hate to keep going back to this, people, but everything goes up and down. John,
Every artist.
yeah, everyone, even Paul, even Ringo, they have little periods where, yeah, you go kind of a little shaky there, Paul, for those couple of albums. Come on, Ringo, those couple of albums were at that. But then they come back. Ringo has come back with great albums. Paul has come back with great albums. John, I feel strongly that John would have done the same. I think he was starting to do that with Double Fantasy and some of the material that's on Milk and Honey, if it had been fleshed out. And who knows what was to come in 82 or 83 or the mid 80s
Right.
or early 90s with John.
You
He
don't know.
didn't have that opportunity. So you could see a better overall bell curve or whatever you want to call it, a algorithm or whatever of his career. He had this one little snapshot. The Beatles break up. He puts out, 5 or 6 solo albums, maybe 7 if you want to
Yeah.
stretch it out a little bit and include rock and roll. But it's very small window. And to judge him on that is unfair, in my opinion.
Yeah. And in that,
Absolutely.
Matt, in that small amount of albums, he runs the gamut of what you'd expect from an artist. First, meaning, at first you have a masterpiece, say it's considered Plastic
Yep.
Ono Band,
Yep.
and another great album with Imagine. Then you have, I'm gonna get their orders right. Sometime in New York City, which was a flop, and
Right.
maybe
Right.
arguably his worst album.
Right.
Everybody has them. Everybody
Yep.
has a turkey. So
Hmm.
he had his turkey, right? And then you talk about Mind Games, which I think is a good album.
It's a step up. Yep. He's building up again. Yep.
And then you got Walls and Bridges, which is a good album.
I love
And
that
then you
album.
have an
Yeah.
album of covers. Paul did Kisses on the Bottom. Ringo
Right.
had
Right.
Sentimental Journey. You have the Rock and Roll album is a
Yep.
covers album.
Yep.
Then he goes on hiatus and comes back with Double Fantasy, which for me as an 18-year-old at the time, I wasn't really blown away by it. Now, at my age now, I much appreciate the songs he did more now
Hmm.
than I did as a teenager. And I think Double Fantasy is now considered something of a very good album, like one of John's best
Oh, the songs
as
on
well.
that on and from that period of his were absolutely outstanding. I mean, I'm like you. I think we were being the same ilk, teenagers at the time. I was looking for more of a rocky, new wave-ish
Yeah,
John,
yeah,
and we didn't get that. We got more of an adult, contemporary,
right.
reflective John. But those songs are absolutely stunning and beautiful as I can look back on them now. But what could we have gotten in the future? He would have come back with more of a
Yeah.
rocking album. Eventually he would have maybe hooked up with a producer or another artist, and had more rock and roll or more current type sounds from the 80s or early 90s. We can only dream and imagine what it would have
Mhm.
been.
And when you compare the albums, I did this in a video, and I want to do more shows on this. It's just a matter of a subjective opinion, but I think if you take just the work that John and Paul did the same years that they did it, sure, everybody's got their own opinion, but I think they're almost at the end. You say, they're kind of tied. Now,
Mm.
not everybody might agree with that, but I mean, I used to take it album by album, year by year, and say, I think from 70 to 75, all hits and misses, they're kind of equal. So, I think that you really can figure John and Paul. People think, oh, Paul has such a better career. Oh, he has such a better career. Yeah, Paul does. He's had 40 years to do a lot of albums,
Mhm.
But just take those years, 70 to 75, and maybe a few singles in there. And they kind of match each other more or less, kind of equal.
Absolutely.
Sometimes Paul has a better, sometimes John is better, sometimes they're equal. And then even 1980, you got McCartney 2, and you've got Double Fantasy for 1980. That's what you go by,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
decide who's got year by year, who's got the better. Or I think they're kind of equal.
Oh, I would totally agree with you. I think that's a great analogy. And you could even kind of throw in Ringo and George when it comes to that period from when the Beatles break up till like 74, 75. All the Beatles were so productive during that 5 year period. They're all putting out great music, they're all having hit singles. I think they all need to be judged as being relatively equal as far as their successes that first half decade after the breakup. Absolutely. I think you're
Mhm.
right.
To get to the present date where we're at with the internet, social media, and all that, I really notice all the time. I mean, you can go to a video on YouTube.
Mm.
It'll say John Lennon on the Mike Douglas show or something, and we all know about the performance with Chuck Berry and Yoko
Yeah.
butting in and all that.
Yeah.
But of course, which I don't approve of. Hey, look, I defend Yoko a lot, but I don't like it. I don't think she should have been present at the sessions and all that. I accept it because
Yeah.
John wanted it. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is, or not even using Mike Douglas, anything where you see John doing a performance or a video of John, before you even look, and try it sometime for those of you who haven't. Immediately in the comments, Yoko hatred everywhere.
Yeah.
John was a bad guy. John was this, and a whole battle ensues that sometimes I try to put sense into it,
Right.
and
Right.
sometimes I don't.
Exactly.
Like we're
Yeah.
talking here today
Yeah.
about, John was they say things these days. John was a wife beater, and John was a bad father, and we already covered the stuff about the dad. If you
Mm.
watched the whole show, we talked about the dad part of it. Um, let's do this wife beater charge, and I call it a charge because if I may. Cynthia Lennon talked about how John hit her one time. And from what we know, what she says herself, it was one time. Now, look, I have to say this. I mean this. I don't condone hitting a woman. I never have. I don't condone it.
Hmm.
Not even once. It's not good. But from what I understand, and correct me if I got this wrong, Matt. John was he was drunk. It was before the Beatles were famous. Not that it matters
Yeah, right.
when it
Oh,
happened,
right. Yeah, it was early on. Yeah.
but and I think she said he shoved her or did something to her. The head went against the wall or something like that, and he
Mm.
was so profusely upset that he was so regretful and promised never to do it again. And Cynthia said he kept true to his word, and he never did. You
Mm.
know, and then it turns into that's not. First of all, it's not a wife beater because it's not his wife. I mean, I'm being plain
Right.
semantics here, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not his wife. And then you hear these other stories. John could be a lousy drunk. He was a terrible drunk, and
Hmm.
I'm sure he did a few things. There's a story with Thelma Pickles, a girlfriend of his in the early days when he was a crazy, stupid, uh, violent teenager and punky teenager, and he wanted to have relations with her,
Hmm.
physical, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and supposedly they went up to some place on the top of a building or somewhere where there was other people together and she didn't want to do it with them around, and he supposedly hit her or gave her a slap.
Yeah.
This stuff is horrible. I don't condone it, but I just think certainly, and in John's lifetime and after he died, the last 40 years, you would think there'd be score after score after score of people. This is when John Lennon beat me up. I'm a girl, and I can tell you when John Lennon hit me, and
Yeah.
all these things. And there are no cases like that.
Yeah.
And John doesn't help himself any. If I could just go on a little longer with this,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's good.
John doesn't
Good
help
stuff.
himself and do himself any favors when he writes. I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her, and da da da. And I mean, that's an exaggeration. He exaggerated about everything. And I think in the Playboy interview, he said, uh, the quote is something, I'm paraphrasing here, something like, I fought men and I hit women, any women, any woman.
Mm.
I think that's an exaggeration to make a point. And how many men did he go around fighting? I
Yeah.
mean,
Exactly.
I really, he used to say, in the Rolling Stone interview, he would say, I must have had 1,000 trips. And the
Yeah.
guy said, I think the interviewer said, you mean just like 100, or you mean quite literally 1,000 trips?
Yeah.
You know.
Exactly.
And then I remember it might have been Lisa Robinson. I'm not sure, but there was an 1880 interview where John was talking about, back then. Again, I'm getting get the numbers wrong, but I'm paraphrasing, but you'll get the idea.
Yeah.
He said, Paul and I had to write like 200 songs a week then or something. You talk like that. Oh, I had to write
Yeah.
1,000 songs.
Exaggerating. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she goes, when did you ever have, she said, she called him on it, when did you ever have to write 200 songs or something like
Hmm.
that? And he
Yeah.
goes, well, if you look at the Beatles catalog, you'll see there's a lot of stuff. I get what he's trying to say. But all I'm trying to say by then is don't take it so literally, and I don't condone it. It's awful. But
Oh, it is. Yeah.
let me tell you this, and I'll be done with it. In 1992, Ringo was doing the wonderful Time Takes Time album and the
Hmm.
tours and everything. I have him on I think it's called the E True Hollywood Story interview, where he talks frankly about him being drunk, Ringo. And Ringo says how he beat Barbara up.
Oh, yeah.
He
Yeah.
blacked out and beat her up pretty good.
Yeah.
He's the only one who beat his wife. Dear Ringo, no offense, but I mean by that, and again by that incident, that sounds worse than anything that ever happened. And John, could be promiscuous.
Yeah.
John, embarrassed Yoko. We know the story of how he
Yeah.
slept with another woman,
Yeah.
with Yoko in the other room.
Hmm.
Don't forget, George Harrison, dear old George, he wound up sleeping with Ringo's wife, Maureen.
Mm. Yeah.
Why am I saying this? What about? What about ism?
No, you're making what the point you're making is, not to use a biblical term, but let he who has not sinned cast the first stone.
Good. Well said.
John Lennon sinned. Okay, John Lennon committed things that we absolutely think are wrong, and he was upfront about it, though. John was so open about admitting, this is what I did. I, when I was a youth or an angry youth or a violent, jealous young person, yes, I did hit my woman at that time. Yes, I did do this and hurt Yoko. Yes, I did do that and neglect my first son and blah, blah. He admitted to all his faults and frailties, and he seemed to be working towards trying to make amends on those. But as you greatly pointed out, Ringo isn't perfect. Paul isn't perfect. George isn't perfect. Matt Street's not perfect. Joe Mayo's not perfect. Anyone watching this is not perfect. We've all committed things or done things or sinned, as it were, and have been part of things that we regret and we know are wrong and we shouldn't have done those things. And we can get to a point, if we're allowed to, and we can go through the years and decades longer and become wiser and smarter and learn, we can make amends for those things that we did as in our youthful indiscretions or things we did wrong. And now we can come out the other end, like you and I being in our early 60s, and say, I made some mistakes. I did things that were wrong, but you know what? I appreciate what I have now, who I am, and I'm going to go forward and try to be better and live better and do better. John didn't get that chance.
I think he was well on his way, though.
Right. He was cut off while he was on that path, on that journey. He was cut down. He didn't have the chance. So to malign him now and put him in this box of John Lennon, he was a no good, blah, blah, wife beater, this, that, but he had no redeeming qualities. That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong, because the other three Beatles had their faults, and I'm sure they may not have spoken as openly as John did about their mistakes.
Right.
But let me tell you, the other three made mistakes which could be considered just as questionable.
Yeah, well said. And John did the best he could. That's why he once said, "That's why I'm always on about peace." Because it was kind of, I believe, therapeutic for himself too. He's trying to grow himself. The whole give peace a chance and let's be peaceful and try this, bed in for peace. I think he was also tackling his own inner demons and trying to get himself therapy through this, trying to be a better man, but not always succeeding at that all the time.
Right.
You could see there's a lot of times where he lost his cool, even without Cap, when he came to visit them in the bedroom and everything. He almost he went a little crazy because he's trying. This guy's trying, and I dare say he's doing more than Paul or Ringo or George, maybe arguably. That's a slippery slope.
Right.
I don't know, but he tried to do these peace things. And then what about the women's rights? He did a pro woman's song, on the Sometime in New York City album. Woman is the bleep of the world.
Right.
He did that. That was to try to speak up for women being mistreated. He's trying to come to terms with these things, and also the song in 1980, one of his last, Woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an ode not just to Yoko, as he said, but to all women. And that's why he says that famous quote, for the other half of the sky. They have,
he had come full circle from his anger or the way he treated women in his younger days, to be only having just turned 40 and to come to that realization where he could write a song like Woman.
Right.
Speaks volumes as to how far he had come on the maturity and emotional level. He was definitely on his way, as you said.
Yeah. And when you get to the internet, we know this is the world we're in today. Everybody likes the scandal. Everybody likes the ugly agendas. Let's always be negative about everything. Let's always look for the dirt. And that's all they think about. And that's what irks me about this, Matt. It's that, there's bad. That's part of what made John Lennon who he is. That's what makes people who they are. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that's what, you want to concentrate on Mr. Hyde. You want to concentrate on some of the Dr. Jekyll now and then. John wasn't a saint, and he wouldn't have wanted to be a saint, but he wasn't always the devil either. And then we're in a point now where that's all people want to focus on. And I, for one, am quite tired of it. And I think there should be a little bit more the other way. I never thought I'd say this in 1980 or 1985 or maybe 90, but now it's like it's time to elevate John a little bit again.
Yeah, exactly.
He needs that elevation where back in 1980 or 85, or the 80s, he needed to take it down a notch.
Yeah, he should be used. If anything, you should take where he was at in a negative manner and use him as a positive role model today for somebody who was trying, somebody who had
Made the effort.
been at those low levels, but was when he was cut down, working hard towards improving himself as a human being, as a person, as a family person. He was working to do that. And that should be an example of positivity to people that look at someone like John Lennon, who was very open and honest and admitted his faults, admitted his downsides. But look at the guy was working hard. He was trying to be that example to all to show us that you can have that negative side, but you can work towards being a better person, admitting your faults and working to be stronger and better. And I think he was doing that. And you're right. He should be elevated to, he had his faults, but he was a good person and he was working hard to be a better person. And we need to never forget his contributions musically and otherwise to the Beatles and to the world in general, I think.
Well said. And I don't know why. I forgot to say this before. I remembered now. Well, I don't know why people hold the Beatles to such more like of a perfect status. They
Mm.
expect the Beatles standard. That's what I'm looking for. A higher standard. They expect the Beatles to live to a higher standard than they're ordinary human beings. The four of
Mm.
them.
Yeah.
This nonsense about so and so did this, so and so did that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
them human. They're human beings.
Yeah.
The whole
Take
thing.
take away the fame, take away the title of Beatle. They're just four guys and just four people like the rest of us, individuals who were human beings. They had faults, they had frailties, they had good sides, bad sides, positive emotions, negative emotions. Beatle or not, they're just like
Yeah,
you and I.
yeah. Give me a break. He's a human being, not just because he's John Beetle John.
Right,
And he
right,
says,
exactly.
and finally, I want to say, well, you've heard us talk about all this stuff. You can see that I realize how important John is. Matt and I both see how important John is and was and all of that. But having said that, when you have a lot of this negativity out there, you're reading all this stuff and bickering, and John's this, and how a bad guy he is, and all that. I even start drinking the Kool Aid, and I'm the guy here that's telling you I know all the good about John. And even I'm starting to get brainwashed. It
Yeah.
happens, and what I mean by that is this thing about Paul now being, he's the only one. Ringo too. I'm talking about of John and Paul, the Lennon and McCartney
Right, right,
songwriting
right.
partnership. You know, it's Paul's only one left of that partnership. I tend to see him now a lot of time. I can't even believe I'm doing it. I see him as the Beatle. I see it.
Mm.
I look at a photo of the Beatles these days. I swear to God, I do, and I see Paul as the front man. To me, there's Paul and the other three guys. All right,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
me talking. Can you
yeah.
believe it? It's like I'm looking at I don't know Herman's Hermits, and I'm looking at Peter Noon, or the I'm trying to think of an example, Rolling Stones, and I'm looking
Like
at Mick
Mick
Jagger,
Jagger. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I'm like, this is the guy. He's in the front. The other guys, three guys, are his muses. And John was really, the guy in the band who was lazy and didn't want to really spend the time in the
Mhm.
studio. He didn't really want to spend a lot of time to get it right. And Paul was like the perfectionist that would be there. And he does, you can see in Get Back, the Get Back documentary. I mean, that really does Paul a lot of favors
Yeah,
because that's
yeah.
that's where Paul was and John was at the time. Where John was a little more passive and does not as interested, and heroin at the time he did was doing
Yeah,
heroin. Let's
yeah.
face it, here and there. So in that instant, that's the way the
That's
world
a
sees Paul.
snapshot. Yeah, they see that snapshot and Get
Yeah,
Back, and they think, but too bad we didn't have like a Get Back type documentary from '64, because I think the picture would have been completely different. Of if you would have been able to been in the studio when they were recording like Beatles for Sale or Hard Day's Night, you would have seen a very dominant John Lennon
yeah,
calling the
exactly.
shots and making the decisions
Right.
and being the leader. We didn't get to see that. We only see this little snapshot, like you said, in the Get Back period of Paul being the
Yes.
workaholic, the cheerleader.
We don't
But
have a movie like that, a footage of
right,
that
right,
yet.
yeah,
And as far as like but Matt, even for me, even photographs, just simple photographs,
yeah,
my eye just goes to Paul
yeah.
lately. And this is I'm a John. I mean, I like all the Beatles, but I'm more of a John guy. But even
Hmm.
if my eye is going to Paul as the number
Right,
one, as the guy,
Wh-
the man, then obviously I know a lot of these young people are. In
right,
fact, I was
right.
at my record store. that I go to one day. This is a few years ago, and there was a guy just getting into the Beatles, a young guy, like 17, 18, something like that. And he said, "Well, didn't Paul write all the songs and just
Oh,
he really
jeez.
he had to approve everybody else's?" And he said, "What would I said, no, that's not what happened."
Oh my God.
And he believes this, and this I'm gonna my part of it. I'll let you say yours, but my way I feel about this is Paul is doing a great job, and he's going to be very active this year too. He might even have another album this year.
Yeah, that's what they say.
I hope he continues, but when that fateful day comes that we lose Paul, hopefully not for a long time, but when we do, I think ultimately, and it'll take some years, maybe
Hmm.
5, 10 years after the grieving, when all the Beatles and Ringo too, when they're all passed on, then I think they'll all be more on a level field.
Hmm.
I could be wrong, but then I think people will look back because there'll be four guys from the past who are not really doing new things now, and then the John and Paul dynamic may level out a bit again.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah. Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think because of the high profile of Paul and Ringo, and obviously their longevity, making it into their 80s, obviously they're still here. They're still It's not like they're retired and they're off in a cabin in the woods somewhere and they're not in the public eye. Paul and Ringo are very active and certainly in
Thank
the
God. I want
yeah
that to be
and
clear
yeah,
out there.
thank
I'm
God,
happy. I'm
thank
happy about
goodness.
it. I'm not,
No one is happier than you and I that Paul and Ringo are still out there carrying the torch with music. The Beatles, they're doing it all, and certainly Paul, being one of the chief Beatles songwriters, thank goodness he's still out there and so active. But I think you're absolutely right because they are here right now, and certainly Paul. The spotlight is going to be more focused on him. The younger kids, the kids that were not even alive when John passed away, they're going to hone in on Paul and to a lesser extent Ringo, but Paul and what he's doing. He's active. He's carrying that Beatles torch. He's still being interviewed. He's still talking about it. He's still producing music. But as you said, I totally agree. When that sad day comes, and hopefully, like you said, knock on wood for a long time, when they're both not here anymore, yeah, it's going to take a little while. I think you're exactly right. But over time, whether it's years or decades, I think the playing field will be more even. It'll be like the Beatles, the four individuals. They were here, they're not here anymore, but here's what they created. Here's the impact they had on the world. And I think they're all going to be, I think they'll be more equally appreciated then. Sadly, we have to wait till then, but that's what's going to happen.
well,
You know?
it's okay, Paul. I want
Yeah, yeah,
more tours, more records.
yeah, absolutely.
But well, I got to say, Matt, I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for coming up here again on FaB Gab. And of
Yeah,
course,
this was fun.
anytime you're welcome back. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's a great topic too. I like it when we people can talk seriously about the Beatles and some of these more serious topics. I think it's important, and I think it's a great thing that you wanted to do this because I think the word needs to get out there about John and the importance of his legacy.
And I think I'll change some minds here. But if you listen to everything we said here and
Yeah,
consider it, maybe you'll look differently. I can only hope that.
hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
So thank you, Matt. Continue to
Thank
watch
you.
Matthew's channel, Matthew Street, and of course, everybody out there. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll
Thank
see
you,
you soon.
Joe. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everybody for being here. Thanks.
Okay.